and Inclusion Champions. So welcome to this Diversity and Inclusion live dialogue session from the Global Alliance. We are celebrating June as the Diversity, Inclusion, and Equality Month. And we are happy to have today two diversity and inclusion champions that are not only experts, but very respected public relations practitioners, and you will understand why. I will try to summarize their expertise in one slide per participant, per panelist, which is quite a challenge to do so. So I will start with Dr. Bey-Ling, who is also APR. She's professor and dean at the College of Communications at California State University in Fullerton. She is co-author of the latest edition of Gottlieb and Center's Effective Public Relations 11th edition, the world's longest continuously published textbook in the field. That is kind of our Bible. As the 2016-2021 editor-in-chief of the Journal of Public Relations Research, Dr. Shah published themed issues on diversity, women, spirituality, and public relations and internal communication in pandemic times. Quite interesting. Also, the Public Relations Society of America named Dr. Shah its 2012 Outstanding Educator of the Year and honored her in 2019 with the D. Park Gibson Pioneer Award for contributing to, quote, increase awareness of public relations within multicultural communities and promoting issues that meet the needs of these diverse communities, close of quote. Dr. Shah's primary research program examines the intersection of identity and public relations, for which she won the 2018 Pathfinder Award from the Institute for Public Relations. Welcome, Dr. Shah. I am going to introduce you now to Trisch L. Smith. She is the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Edelman. And during her extensive tenure with Edelman, Smith has managed stakeholder outreach, strategic positioning, crisis and reputation management campaigns for a host of Fortune 500 corporations. For a decade, Smith led the firm's award-winning multicultural practice. In 2015, she was appointed to serve as the U.S. Managing Director of Diversity and Inclusion, and in fall of 2018, she was named Edelman's first Global Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. Congratulations for that, Trish. Some of her accomplishments include establishing the firm's employee networks, achieving gender pay equity and gender parity in leadership, as well as increased racial, ethnic workforce diversity. Among her awards, she has received plenty. She was featured as one of the top 100 most influential Blacks in corporate America and in one of the most influential women in corporate America in Savoy magazine. Adweek AdColor Champions Award of Diversity and Inclusion in 2019, Woman of Excellence in 2018, and P&L Executive of the Year by the National Association of Female Executives, Spectrum Circle Award for Innovation in Media in 2017, and recognized in the Financial Times in 2016 as one of the upstanding 100 for top diverse executive leaders globally. So welcome both of you, Dr. Shah and Trish. We are happy to start this conversation. This is not a formal conference per se, but we wish to make the most out of this dialogue where we have the opportunity to have you with the Global Alliance, our representatives from the Academy and practitioners as well. Welcome, and thank you for allowing time to this important conversation. So I would like to start by understanding a little bit about your upbringing, your years studying elementary or secondary at the university. Do you feel Do you feel that once you were studying and sharing in your communities, that you were discriminated somehow, that you were opening a path for others to come? How did you find your way to work towards diversity and inclusion? Because it's a very personal journey. Dr. Shah, do you like to start this conversation?
Oh my goodness. Okay. How far back do you want to go? Like how I'm old. I could
As
go
you're
back.
comfortable, as you're comfortable.
So I think, Gladys, your question fundamentally is how does one embark on diversity, equity, and inclusion work? And
Exactly.
actually, there has been some really interesting recent literature on that in terms of how people enter the work. You know, one way for people is to just kind of have this cognitive understanding of why the work is important. For many people, what often happens is some kind of incident, instigating incident, you know, they're kind of slapped in the face, literally, or figuratively with something that has happened that has struck them. And then, you know, for some people, it's just kind of something that they grew up with from a very young age, or just something that's just kind of always been a part of them. And so I think reflecting on those kinds of different entry points, I would say my entry point is really that third category where this has just seemed to be work that I always have cared about, even from a young age, because what I care about is not so much diversity and equity and inclusion, but what I ultimately care about is justice and social justice, and diversity
Fairness.
and inclusion to me are strategies to get to that ultimate goal of justice, right? Which as a child, yes, it's about fairness. It's about, well, how come my sister gets this, but I don't get that? Or how come the other kids in the neighborhood do it this way and I don't get to do it that way? And so I think that for me is just, as I reflect on it, that for me fundamentally is just how I came to this work, is just in the broader pursuit of social justice, right? For myself, for people who look like me, for others who have been disadvantaged in society overall. And I'm happy to chat about that more, but you know, Trish, I really want to hear your experience as well.
Trish?
Sure thing. I want to make sure you all can hear me okay. Can you hear me
Yes.
good? Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful. You know, technology, you always have to check. So first of all, Gladys, thank you for this opportunity to be here to share and to discuss. So my journey has been interesting. My background is in broadcast journalism. I have my master's degree in broadcast journalism. I wanted to report, produce, be the next Oprah, finished grad school and did some freelancing and decided I wanted to flip the coin, if you will, and instead of reporting on the news, go into helping clients get in or out of the news and helping to develop stories, create narratives on behalf of various types of clients. I have an advocacy background at the same time, and I finished grad school and I was interviewing for PR firms after doing some freelance reporting. I was also interviewing for a role at the NAACP. So that just shows that sort of balance of sort of where I was. I started at a small agency focusing on nonprofit philanthropy PR, and then came to Edelman. So I've grown up at Edelman, been here for 20 years. So I started when I was 12, is the story that I'm sticking to, but been here quite a bit of my life and have done a whole host of things, as you mentioned in my bio. What has driven me to this work comes from my personal experience in being one of the only in many rooms. And in fact, being a double or triple only in some rooms. And that sense of feeling out of place or not feeling that I belonged, and the personal responsibility I feel that I have to create space and place for people like me is what has driven me to this work. To ensure that we are purposeful and intentional about creating opportunities to ensure that diversity of all types are represented within the PR industry, within the agency realm, is something that I feel that I have a great privilege to do, but also responsibility to do. So personally, that's what drove it. I was leading our multicultural practice, as you mentioned, for 10 years, working with clients like Starbucks, Walmart, Toyota, GE, several Fortune 50 even clients, and how they were showing up for their diverse stakeholders. And a lot of that work began to focus on DEI. So they were asking us, help us communicate our DEI efforts, our commitment to these diverse audiences. And I then quickly said, well, what is it? And we learned that they, in fact, didn't really have a strategy in some instances. So I then said, we need to do more of this for ourselves within our industry and for our firm. So those are some of the reasons, both personal and professional, and ways by which I arrived at this work.
And I asked this question to begin the conversation because in my case, I am not only Latina, but Puerto Rican. I am a woman. I am Christian. I am Black, but I have, look at my eyes. Some people tell me if I am Filipino. So we have in Puerto Rico a mix of cultures. We have from the Spanish, from the slaves, from the Indians that reside in Puerto Rico, and we have a mixture, and we are accustomed in Puerto Rico to see all of us as one. We are all the same, but when we go outside of Puerto Rico, we don't have that same experience. And sure, there's discrimination in Puerto Rico, and sure, there should be more opportunities in Puerto Rico, but my upbringing was very different because I did not felt out of place, even though Black people here are discriminated. That's a fact. And we should have more and greater opportunities. And those experiences marked us as persons, as professionals, and marks our neighbors, our clients, everybody, because you cannot separate the human being from their cosmovision and their experiences. And that takes me to another question. How is diversity, inclusion, and equality in the academy, in the case of Dr. Shah, and how is in the case of the agencies, in the agencies world, because these are two different contexts, but very important ones. So please share your point of views, Dr. Shah. How do you see that playing in the academy, in the role of forming, of, preparing the professionals that are coming into the practice, and the curriculum? How is that playing in the academy?
I think the academy has a lot of work to do in the area of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. One of the things about the academy, at least in the United States, similar to other aspects of American culture, is a very strong belief in meritocracy, right? The idea that somehow the best work gets rewarded, right? The best research gets published, the best teaching gets honored. And I think that academics, especially as we think about our social responsibility, preparing future practitioners who go out into this real world where the meritocracy is more obviously a sham than it is perhaps in the academy. I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of self-examination, self-interrogation, to really ask some of the hard questions about what makes something the best research, quote unquote, what makes something the best teaching, quote unquote. And, I'm really proud of being in the College of Communications at Cal State Fullerton, because that's one of the things that my faculty have really taken to heart and begun to think about with intentionality. So for example, looking at our criteria, right, for tenure and promotion, what exactly are those criteria? Do those criteria, as in the case of many universities, those criteria often emphasize research, but We historically emphasize research that's published in traditional academic journals. And the faculty now are really asking some questions of themselves, rightfully, in terms of other kinds of research that can be done, right? Like community-based research, action-based research, social equity research, the kinds of research that might be more relevant to our students, might be more relevant to the communities that our students come from, and yet for a variety of reasons may not have a publication home in our traditional academic journals.
Interesting, very interesting. Trish, you belong to the agency world, which is another context. And you were talking about, and as I read your bio, about some of the achievements and some of the work that you have done. Please tell us, how have you done it? Because I believe it's not easy. It's not an easy task in the agency world to open the doors to different groups, to be able to be inclusive and to be able to be fair and to make justice, as Dr. Shah was explaining.
Your belief is absolutely accurate, right? There are definitely some challenges and some issues and opportunities, right, to
Yes.
ensure that we're working to drive diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I would say that even first there, defining what diversity means, right? Even within the context of our agencies, we often think of those things we can see, which are critically important to what we think in terms of race, ethnicity, or gender, because we really don't know necessarily by our eyes view either. But it is a whole host of things. And you mentioned several characteristics and attributes that all make us uniquely distinct and different. But even defining diversity, equity, and inclusion, and even belonging in these new terms we're hearing more and more, I think is a critical step in the journey for any organization, and in particular in agencies. I think that we have oftentimes seen, and we're beginning to pull back the layers now on the systemic issues that exist, systemic racism, systemic ageism, even systemic sexism in an industry, in the agency world, which is majority female. However, you don't see those females in the most senior leadership roles as often as they should be. So addressing some of those systemic issues, taking a real hard look at the state of the industry so that we can be honest with ourselves and each other, so that we can then drive change. To your point about the journey that we've been on, it's been an interesting one, a challenging yet rewarding one. One of the things we work to do is to address that gender parity that we mentioned in leadership. When I first started this work, we were about nearly probably 40-ish% women in leadership, although we're 70% women. And there was the goal to at least get to that gender, parity there, to make sure that we had women in the most senior ranking roles. I'm happy to share that we're 50-some percentage now in the US and 51% in the globe. So working there, but that's just one area. And again, we're not alone in the agency world in that women in senior leadership is a challenge. Race, ethnicity within our workforce is a challenge, right? When we look at the representation around our globe, our teams do not accurately and directly reflect the audiences we're trying to reach, which is critically important as communicators and storytellers, to have practitioners who understand the audiences we're trying to reach, who are a part of the community, who understand the needs, the wants, the mores, the language of those audiences. And so that's another area we work to address. And fundamental to both of those areas is setting real goals, setting goals you can track, that you can monitor and measure your progress along the journey. So we did that as well. So that's another thing. And that was not about quotas. Let me be very clear. That's about setting a goal and establishing a lighthouse in which we can all work towards, just as we would in any other business imperative, right? We set goals for anything else in our business. And if we're going to be successful, you have to set a goal. What's measured matters, right? And what matters gets measured. And so that was critically important as well for us and our journey. And I know for many others that I've spoken with in other agencies and other industries.
Very interesting, because everything that we do in public relations should and must be measured. Metrics are so important. And also companies and brands should work on strategic planning with measurable objectives, not with intentions that, stay in the abstract without having any direct measurable impact. And we see too often, for my taste, for my like, too often we see something that companies has in posters in their walls that somehow doesn't translate into what they really are to the core, their DNA values, their what they believe and what they do on the everyday basis, what they implement, what the legal department, the HR, the public relations, all the C-suite should be implementing on. So there's a lack, there's kind of an abysm between what companies or brands say they believe and what they actually do. Do you see it that way, Dr. Shah, or do you have any research that can show us, that can add some light into that tunnel?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a disconnect between what many organizations say versus what many organizations do. And, I'm really struck reading Trisch's bio about how Edelman has achieved pay equity, right? Because all the research shows that there's a huge gender pay gap in many disciplines, including in public relations. And in public relations, that gendered pay gap is now going into its third generation, broadly speaking. Wow. So, because when it first was documented back in the 70s, the idea was, well, women are relatively new to public relations, they'll catch up. And then as women became the majority in public relations, it was, well, women haven't been around as long, or, oh, they take breaks to have kids, or, oh, they're not in management. And the research that's been done now has basically debunked every single one of those reasons, and yet the pay gap still persists. And so I'm really curious to know from Trish, and I know that there are some questions in the chat, and maybe Gladys, we can get to those, but I'm really interested to hear from Trish about how Edelman made its actions match its words, and specifically as it regards pay equity across gender.
Yeah, so thank you for that. So I would say I'll start where you ended, and that is that it really is a case by which organizations have to walk the talk. And are you living what you espouse, right? Are you living what you say you are or what you desire to be? And that living does really require a strategic plan in which everyone can focus on or get behind. I often say that it's my job to help to establish our strategy and execute our activities and programs, but it's everyone's responsibility. It's really everyone's job, top down. And we won't transform our organizations no matter what type of institution you're within, whether it's academia, whether it's agency, whether it's in-house doing comms, PR. You will not be successful if you do not have the participation of everyone throughout the entire enterprise. And it's not a business imperative. It cannot be an option or a nice to do, good thing to do. It's a must do in order to be successful. In terms of our gender pay, there are a few things. One, we actually tracked it. So we do an actual annual report. So that's where it starts. You have to know where you are to know where you're going. And investing in that, we partner with external vendors who come in and help us do it, look at it through third-party review. So that was core, right? To see where are the gaps, because there were some, right? And identifying those. And then once those were established, how could we then bridge the gap? What were the steps we needed to put in place? And it was within certain teams, certain geographies. We have 63 offices around the world. Wow. In every continent, right? So imagine that when you talk about sort of gender norms and inequities and inequalities that exist. And so needing to then look at it in case-by-case basis across various teams and types of work and geographies to work to address that. It's an ongoing process because you can hit the mark one year and not the next, right? So it is something we look at regularly. We monitor, measure the progress, and then work to address the situations case by case. But fundamentally, it starts with even being proactively doing that analysis and working with the right players. If you don't have the processes or systems internally, identifying those vendors, partners who can help you in that.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. Oh, go ahead.
No, just commenting on what Trish was saying. You do the reporting and the metrics and then use that as a measure to keep on working, as an evaluation to keep on working and progressing, because if not, it's useless. You're working again with intention, something that it's in the air and that you cannot measure point blank. Here's the progress we have made. Here is the area of opportunity. Here are the areas where we should be working on. Dr. Shah, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, I want to underscore what Trish said about having the data, getting the data, and actually using the data. You know, I do a similar thing within our college where annually I get faculty salaries, and I annually look at faculty salaries within departments. My college has 4 departments, just to make sure that any discrepancies that might exist are well-grounded in something besides happenstance, right? And where I work, that's especially important because salary increases are based on percentages, right? So when you get promoted in rank as a faculty member, it's a % increase on your base salary. So anybody who does math knows that over time, whatever gaps exist, when the raises are given on the basis of % of base, you know, any gaps that exist will only get exacerbated over time. So I agree with Trish also that it's really an ongoing monitoring situation where you can't, it's not a one and done, oh, we fixed gender pay gap or whatever. Are we going to answer the question in the chat?
At the end of the session, we will address all the questions. Okay. Yes, of course. So moving on to research. What research? Because I know that Edelman has the trust barometer, which is a study that we use consistently to measure reputation, trust, and the pillars of diversity, equality, and inclusion, and how does it impact the reputation of the company, the trust, and everything. Do you have any other, Dr. Shah, do you have any other study that you use as a reference to measure diversity, inclusion, and equality that you will want us to talk, you want to talk to us about?
You know, I would say that there are so many different studies. I'm kind of hard pressed to just cite one.
Okay.
But I do want to get to, Gladys, this question in the chat, because I actually think it's foundational to some of the things that we're talking about. So the question in the chat is diversity and inclusion defined differently depending on the organization and the cultural background, or is there only one global definition? You know, because I think to your question, Gladys, about the research, part of the challenge that we have is not only that so much research gets done. I think that's one challenge. A second challenge is that the research that gets done is of varying quality, right? And so that's another challenge, is all these different organizations put research out there. Some of it is good research, some of it is less good research, some of it is research using a statistically random sample, some of it is research based on whoever conveniently chose to answer. And, you know, there's just a great variety out there. And then the third problem with the research, to answer this person's question, is that we don't have common definitions. There is absolutely not one global definition of diversity and inclusion. And I think that makes it challenging sometimes to even have these conversations when we're talking about different things, right? So in terms of definitions, I would say this, which is that diversity can be examined, measured, researched across a whole host of dimensions, right? They can be primary, immutable dimensions. They can be secondary dimensions that are changeable. So for example, gender, race, historically are not changeable categories, right? So they're more considered primary dimensions of diversity. Political affiliation, socioeconomic status, geography, where you live, those tend to be secondary aspects of research, where aspects of diversity that people can change, different groups, right, depending on how much they earn, so on and so forth. So I think there is not a single definition, but what strikes me as really problematic is this. The further away we get from a single definition, and ironically, the broader and more diverse our definition of diversity becomes, we lose the fundamental we lose sight of the fundamental dimensions on which all our problems are based. And those dimensions are race and gender, right? So many diversity discussions in organizations, whether it's the academy or agency or the profession, so many diversity conversations go off on this tangent of, well, what about this group? Let's have diversity of political views, or let's have diversity of perspectives. You know, we're diverse because we all have different opinions. Well, that's just definition of being human. That's not talking about DE&I in an intentional way to fix the fundamental injustices that we have and continue to have that are historically and ongoingly grounded in race and grounded in gender.
I think I wholeheartedly agree, and it's absolutely right. I will say that in addition to that, of course, diversity means different things in different parts of the world, right? So in the work that I'm doing for our organization, when I talk about diversity in parts of APAC, that's very different than when I talk about it in LATAM and even the US, even versus South Africa or our Africa operations in Kenya and Joburg. So wholeheartedly agree with the doctor. I would say that it means different things in different parts of the world, and the need to understand that is critical to do the work. As we're developing our global strategy and vision, it's important that we recognize that that's going to require sort of tailoring to best meet the needs of the local realities and geographies that we serve. I would say as well that you cannot maintain diversity without inclusion and equity, right? You cannot. You can have an inclusive environment in which people feel that they belong, but it not be diverse. But you cannot maintain diversity without the two. You will create a revolving door in which individuals will come into your organization but leave because they don't feel welcomed, valued, appreciated, respected. That they not only have a seat at the table, but they have a voice, that their voice is heard. So I just want to underscore that you cannot maintain diversity if you don't have inclusion, equity, belonging. In fact, inclusion and equity are the elements that drive belonging.
Exactly.
You have to have those fundamentals. And a very, very basic way that I often tell when I'm talking to folks as sort of an intro primer about DEI is like, think about it being invited to a party. Diversity is like someone inviting you in or you coming in. And just the fact that we say invite demonstrates, again, a level of supremacy, right? And power dynamics, right? But someone coming into our organization, diversity, inclusion, someone asking you then to dance, and belonging, them actually learning your moves. How are we moving beyond you just saying you're letting someone in the door, but someone actually having agency and that they actually feel that their voice, again, is something that is heard, valued, and appreciated. And that is some of the sort of justice work that the fine doctor is talking about here, how we're moving beyond fairness to true justice, how we're dismantling systemic infrastructure that has existed, that created these inequalities and inequities for generations and generations. That's some of the work that needs to be done now, and that we're seeing organizations really revisit or visit for the first time over these last 2 years. The acceleration that we've seen in the area of DE&I, in the space of fostering inclusive, equitable, and diverse workplaces, has been just incredible to see that movement. My fear is that there's been some waning of the prioritization of the urgency in driving it. And it's our responsibility to make sure as practitioners, right, as voices within our organizations, that we're continuing to keep it at the forefront and at the top of the agenda.
I believe that public relations professors and practitioners have a huge responsibility in achieving a quantum leap in terms of progress with diversity, inclusion, and equality, because we are the conscience of the companies or the students that are forming and becoming tomorrow's practitioners. We are the ones that are talking to the C-suite in order to hear all the different publics that we are talking to, that we depend on, that are our neighbors, that are the people we serve. We are the ones that are promoting the respect, the appreciation of the different voices and experiences and groups. We are the ones that are talking on behalf of them to generate understanding, social adjustment, social harmony. And I believe some other professionals can also contribute to the progress of the pillars of diversity, inclusion, and equality. But I feel the pressure in my shoulders because we have a a crucial role to play. I don't know if you share my vision, but we have to make people in top management understand the importance of these pillars and the importance of taking action, not only educating employees and the community and the publics, but taking action to show that diversity, inclusion, and equality is important for the business, for the employees, for generating mutually beneficial relationship with different publics. So your view on that, Dr. Shaw?
Oh, I completely agree. I completely agree, but I would also say that no one can fix any problem alone.
Exactly.
Right? And that's true for individuals as it is for different business functions. And so I sometimes get a little worried when public relations people say, well, we are the only conscience of the organization, because we can't be, right? And I think for us to be really successful in this work, we really need to identify willing partners.
Exactly.
And really work collaboratively across our organizations, whether it's people in HR or whether it's people in different parts of the company that we may not have previously thought of, right? But it can't just be something that the public relations function does in isolation, although it's helpful certainly when we're involved compared to when we're not.
Agreed.
I would just say that PR cannot drive the DEI effort of an organization, right? It has to be grounded in, there's only so much lipstick you can put on a pig. I often say the kinds when I do my client, counsel on the multicultural engagement or outreach side or DEI side, is that what are you actually doing, right? It has to be grounded in a strategy with, again, meaningful goals and metrics attached to it. The reality of what you just mentioned, though, is important to note, in that there is a weight of the work, WEIGHT of the work, as we are all women of color on this Zoom today chatting about this, have all, I'm sure, had our own individual experiences of isms, right, of microaggressions and other things. And so the reality is it's our lived experience that we encounter day in and day out. We should not and cannot be the only voices addressing the work, right, addressing the needs that exist, and the importance of, and I don't even say allies, we don't need allies, we need accomplices, people who are actually engaged, who are locking arm in arm to address some of the disparities. So that's what needs to happen. PR has an important role in helping to drive awareness to the importance of, and that's some of the work that you mentioned our trust barometer has looked at. We actually just released our 4th report on racial justice about 2 weeks ago, and it looks at where employees and consumers think that organizations are as it pertains to addressing racial justice. Now,
interesting.
And it's fascinating. Of course, as we can imagine, people don't think that they're doing a good job, that the commitments that they lauded 2 years ago, they haven't met. And in fact, some haven't even worked to really address. And so there's a huge gap. There's a tremendous trust erosion based upon that, and the need for companies to walk the talk, as we stated. And that's in a whole host of ways, whether it's representation in the most senior levels and throughout the ranks of their organization in terms of racial ethnic diversity, whether it's a commitment from the CEO and active involvement, whether it's dedicated resources in the way of a DEI role officer and the right resources, right? Not just checking a box and putting someone in a position, but giving them power and a purse, right, to actually drive some of the work. But a whole host of things that organizations are not doing to meet the needs, and their repercussions. People are making decisions and they're voting with their purses and their pocketbooks. Employees are deciding where they're going to work or not work in terms of applying or leaving based upon what companies are doing around DE&I, and that's within our industry and beyond. So there is a mandate. It's not a question. It's not a an option. It is a mandate and an expectation from your various stakeholders and from your employees. So there's work to do. There's much work to do, but it can't all be us doing the work.
Exactly. Exactly. I agree.
And actually, I have a question about that. So I think we know, and people in the Global Alliance know, that professional and ethical public relations is not just about words, right? It's also about actions, right? So when we talk about public relations, it's talking the talk, but it's also walking the walk. And I'm wondering, when clients come to agencies like Edelman or other agencies, do clients always understand that you can do more than just help them talk about something, or as you put it, Trish, putting lipstick on a pig, right? Like, there are fundamental things that public relations practitioners can do that are beyond communications to actually guide organizational actions. And I'm wondering if all of your clients understand that when they first get to you.
That would be a hard no, that they don't always an absolute no, and that they don't always understand it. But I will tell you, as an organization and as a company that's done the trust barometer the last 21 years, and I don't want to make this about Edelman, but just to say about the power of what we do as practitioners, is that it is an amazing opportunity to tell people, like, here's how we can help you actually drive change,
Exactly.
right? Here's what you can do. And for us, it's about action driving trust. When you act, that enables you to build the trust,
Exactly.
to bridge that divide. And so it's really helping them reposition and reimagine what the possibilities are about the change. This research that I mentioned also shows, our annual trust barometer, that people expect business to address some of the biggest social issues over government, over NGOs, and of course, over the media. And so they're looking to the business community.
Very revealing that results.
Right, to drive change. And so that means we've got to do our jobs differently. Our job is not only to write a press release, to write a narrative that they want us to parrot, but it's about how can we help inform, influence, change.
I would add one thing to what you said, and I know you don't want to make it about Edelman, but really Edelman was leading, when the company first put together that trust barometer, right?
Yes.
And you're right, Trish, that it was really striking in the latest study that for the first time ever, corporations were viewed as more trustworthy than government and elected leaders and, definitely the media. And that speaks to kind of the weight of the work, right? That, like you mentioned earlier, that public relations practitioners bear. And I want to add something else to what you said about creating trust through organizational action. That is true, but it's also about creating trust through organizational action that aligns with organizational words, right? That's how trust is created. And especially now in the DEI space in the last 2 years, there have been lots of companies with lots of words.
And no action.
Well, I don't know if it's no action, but definitely the actions have not kept pace with the words. And anytime you have that disconnect, trust gets eroded, right? And so to me, corporations are at this really important juncture where people have more trust in you than many other social institutions. And yet,
that's a huge opportunity. That's the way I see it. I don't know you, Trish. When I saw Edelman Trust Barometer recent findings, so I said, after COVID-19 and the pandemic hit, the way the consumers and the citizens view the companies, private companies, vis-a-vis governments and NGOs, that's a huge opportunity for corporations that are not doing what they should be doing in terms of corporate social responsibility, in terms of transparency, in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, in terms of serving better their employees, responding to their needs. So the ones that are doing the job, kudos for them. The ones that are not should see an example to follow. I don't know your view on that, Trish.
Yeah, I think, we've lived through like a crisis or quadrises the last 2 years, right? 3 or 4 crises at once, from COVID, its disproportionate impact on Black and Brown communities, to the economic downturn that ensued as a result, to the fight against racism and to end systemic racism that was sort of sparked by George Floyd's murder and other murder.
The pressure of corporate activism
Right.
included in that.
All of those things, right? The LGBTQIA movement and the fight against the decline of women's rights. There's so many things that we've lived through. And as a result, I think many organizations are going through an identity crisis, that they're
Yes.
trying to determine who they are, what they are, and who they want to be when they grow up. And the gap really, I think, in many organizations, before we even get to building trust, is between your values and your actions that you're willing to take to live those values. And I think that's where we are in this crisis, to establish who you are, what can you do, how can you be a force for change. And once you establish those values, you can then build an action plan, if you will, a roadmap to help in getting there, which then strengthens trust between your internal audiences and your external stakeholders. And I think that's really what we're seeing, is this schism, if you will, this crisis of recognizing who you are, what you may have been, but what now the current mandate is for you to become.
And what is your promise to your publics? What is it that you want to do for them? It's not providing a product, it's providing what? A solution to their everyday life. It's something that companies has to question themselves about. So we have been talking for 45 minutes now. We're coming to an end. I will keep on talking to you for 3, 4, 5 hours more, but we don't have that time. Any final recommendation, comment, view, opportunity that you will see for the academy, for the agencies, for practitioners, for students that are coming into the practice? I'm an eternal optimist. I say it again and again. I love to talk about opportunities instead of challenges or problems. So you share with us your views on that as a final note.
Yeah, I'm not sure I want this to be my final note, but what Trish just talked about raised a question for me, the disconnect between values and actions, right? And the disconnect that it raises for me, in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., paraphrased, it's about how we choose to disregard the implicit connection between racism and capitalism. If a PR firm's job is, and let's be honest, these are not nonprofit companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the PR agency's job is to make money and create value for shareholders, and I know Edelman is family owned, but you know what I mean, you still got to stay in business. And if that value, implicit fundamental value that is a necessity to survive in our capitalistic society, if that value runs counter to some of our other values that we're trying to do in terms of producing social good in the form of greater diversity, equity, and inclusion and social justice, I think those kinds of questions really call to mind the importance of corporate leadership, because this is a conundrum that we're not going to be able to talk our way out of. There really has to be some intentional reflection about where we are going with this, if that makes sense.
I would ditto that +1, and it won't be addressed overnight. And I guess in terms of wrap up, final comments, I would say that as future practitioners and as practitioners within whatever institution, organization you're a part of, is that I would implore you to continue to show up as yourself in those spaces, to be authentically you in those spaces. They need you and your voice, no matter what it may look like around you, to be encouraged and empowered in that. And that diversity is not just something to do or to check a box, but we know that there is value. It drives greater thinking, right? We get to bigger solutions and more breakthrough work when we have that diversity at the table. And so bring who you are there to those organizations and those institutions. We need it. It's necessary if we're going to affect and influence any change.
I so agree with that. And what I do want to be my final word is to say this, that we bring our whole selves to the table in addition to bringing a spirit of inquiry and a genuine openness to intentional change, right? Because the world can only get better when we function as our best selves. And I'm not saying I'm my best self every day, right?
But you try to.
I try.
You are trying.
I try. And I think to recognize that even as we bring our whole selves, that self is constantly evolving. And with reflection and with intentionality, it can be constant evolution for the better.
Great, great conversation. I hope to keep on the dialogue in some other occasion, if you're willing to. Very interesting. We have many insights and valuable information we can put into practice and we can learn from. And that's the whole idea of these diversity and inclusion dialogue sessions from the Global Alliance. On behalf of the board of the Global Alliance, thank you for allowing this opportunity to come to life. And thank you for sharing your thoughts on diversity, inclusion, and equality. We hope to see you very soon, and we are eager to share the recording of this session with the over 320,000 members of the Global Alliance around the globe. So see you next time, Dr. Shah and Trish. Thank you. It has been an honor to have you today.
Thank you so much. It's been a great opportunity. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.